I see you as somebody who is very intentional and not afraid to do intense things. And you
hmm
said the only way I don't become a software engineer professionally is if I stop trying.
Believing in yourself is like one of the most important things you can do. If you don't believe in yourself, why would anybody else? And I used to tell myself like, I'm going to do this, and I believed it. And eventually, it all it takes is one, right?
Do you find yourself going through these slumps of motivation, or do you have any like rhythms that you implement that help you stay motivated?
I love video games. Now that I have like the ability to actually make them myself, the passion is also right there of I want to tell stories. I want to make games that are fun
Yeah.
and have people experience them in the same way that I had for so much of my life.
You can do anything that you set your mind to, but you can't do everything.
I'm curious, and you can cut this out if you want, but I'm curious like how that conversation went with your wife.
Yeah. I like to think that as I bite off more than I can chew, my proverbial cheeks are growing. They're stretching.
Yeah, I think like if I had advice to anybody who is trying to find a way to motivate themselves, it would be to
Hello and welcome back to another episode of How This Indie Dev. Today I'm joined with one of my best friends online, Nikki from iHeart Game Dev. Nikki has been making some of the highest quality tutorials for the Unity game engine that I've seen around the internet, and I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes today. You've garnered around over 80,000 YouTube subscribers now, and I know that you have a really cool backstory for how your career trajectory kind of took from this lane to this lane, and so I want to jump into a bunch of that. Yeah, how's it going?
it's good, man. It's good to speak with you.
Yeah, we were talking offline before we started recording this about how this has been like a really long time coming, because I feel like we have followed each other's work for years now, and we've never had a proper chat.
Yeah, this is the first time speaking like in person or
Yeah.
as close to it as possible. But yeah, I've been following you since I feel like you commented on one of my posts a long time ago, and then I checked out your own channel, and lo and behold, you started uploading not too long after that. So yeah, it's been years at this point, but this is the first time we're actually talking online.
Yeah, I have a bunch of note files on my computer where I keep track of a bunch of things that I want to jot down. But one of my notes is called my YouTube journey. And in it is just filled with like major milestones and screenshots of like analytics and subscriber counts and stuff like that. And from the first day that I uploaded my first YouTube video, I have a screenshot of you retweeting my announcement that I posted my first video. And so you were there from like day one from my channel, which was like, I don't know, like 3 years ago or something now.
Right
I
on,
don't know
man.
how
Yeah,
long.
dude, you got to
But yeah.
support each other. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
That algorithm is like it's very difficult to grow unless you have something that goes viral.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about how you've grown your YouTube channel and kind of the learnings that you've had there. But for people who aren't like familiar with your work, could you just take a second to kind of describe or like introduce yourself? You know, what are you doing online and all that jazz?
What am I doing online? It's a very good question. A few years ago, COVID happened, and I mean, we'll get into this a little more, but essentially, I had two jobs at the time, one of which was a fitness instructor, and that was all in person, and COVID obviously put a stop to that. So I ended up with a lot more free time than I once had. Like many people out there, I really love video games, and the other job that I had at the time and still have is I'm a developer, software developer. And I thought to myself, it would be really cool to learn how to make games. I went onto YouTube and started looking for beginner tutorials. And of course, there's Brackeys, which is probably still one of the best YouTube channels out there. But what I found difficult was anything to do with like 3D stuff. There's a channel, and there is a channel called Mix and Jam, which is run by Andre. And he started like recreating a lot of really cool features in popular games. I think one of the ones that caught my eye was Overwatch, and he recreated one of the characters' like special move. And he mentioned something called Mixamo, and that's a like Adobe platform where you can download and use these animations and characters for free. But there weren't any tutorials on how to actually do that. He just like mentioned like, oh, I got it off Mixamo, and I was like, okay, but that doesn't really tell me anything about it. So one of my first videos, if not my first tutorial, was pretty much teaching people how to do that. And I think I had like a tagline in there of like free And obviously that's like one of the keywords that gets a lot of attention here. So that is where my YouTube tutorial, Unity tutorial-esque beginning actually started from.
Yeah, that's so interesting because if I'm not mistaken, your first video that you uploaded wasn't a tutorial. It was more of like a devlog for a game jam. So did you know when you started your channel that you wanted to lean more into tutorials, or were you kind of following what got more attention as you posted different stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, that's so long ago. I don't even remember. I feel like it kind of just happened over time that I saw that my first tutorial did very well. And my other one, like, what was interesting is I had a lot of very supportive people coming from my fitness job, and they knew that like that job kind of stopped. So all these people who were following me on my other social media platforms, I was like, hey, here's my first video about something completely unrelated to fitness. But all of them like jumped into the comments. And I want to say that's like at the time, what really boosted the algorithm was I was like, here's this thing I did over a course of 3 days. And all of them were like, this is so cool. And, you know, that's a lot to say about those people being so supportive. But I do think that is kind of what really kickstarted my my own passion into it, of having these people who were really backing me. And then with the tutorial, it was like all these strangers that I'd never met before who were like, this is actually super helpful. And that's when I was like, okay, it's nice having the support from all these fitness, like the people in my fitness background, but these random strangers are kind of like the demographic that I'm hoping to capture. So I really started to lean into the tutorials after that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember when I posted my first YouTube video, I got a really nice text from my mom, and she said like, it's amazing and she's so proud of me. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice. Thank you, Mom. And then I remember later on, I had I have a Patreon account where people can sign up for, and, you know, friends have signed up to support me. But I remember getting my first Patreon supporter that I didn't know, like a complete internet rando stranger. And that was a completely different feeling. It's like, oh, I have somebody that wants to support me that I've never met before. And, you know, they're actually even like paying me some money so that I can continue to do this. And it's just like, it's a really unique, rewarding feeling, I think.
Totally. I completely agree. And I also would be curious how you feel about like the pressure of that, because I know that I also set up the Patreon, and the moment that like you're selling something, I feel obligated to either support whatever I'm selling or ensure that what I'm doing is of the highest quality, and all these new pressures that I didn't have before, just like it kind of just appeared. And it's like, okay, now you have these expectations to meet.
Yeah, 100%. I remember when I was contemplating quitting my day job to start doing YouTube and game dev full time. And I remember thinking how awesome it would be to be kind of in charge of my own direction and the freedom that comes with that, and not having a boss. And I feel like I've come to realize that really I just have a lot of bosses now. And it's like the people who are buying my games or watching my videos, you know, and it's like I kind of am beholden to the whims of that community in some ways. I remember doing a lot of research for Patreon accounts that I thought were doing things really well, and I made a spreadsheet of how many Patreon supporters they had, how much they were getting, how much their tiers were, what their reward system was, and doing all of this market research just for Patreon. And the conclusion that I came to is that I can't spread myself too thin, and I didn't want to have to be obligated to be putting more things into people's hands because they chose to support me. So right now I just have one tier. It's $5 a month, and there's no rewards for it. And it's just like I try and make consistent update posts on there about some stuff that's behind the scenes, but that's it. Like I don't, and I've used it. Like I've given people early access to like demo builds and stuff, but nothing is promised. And so it really is just, and you know, I could probably get more support if I actually used it more as a transactional sort of deal. But
Sure.
Yeah, just with my limited time, I decided to go that route.
Super interesting. I feel like, and that's one of the things that I respect about you the most, is like you definitely think through all of these different like paths before you actually make a decision. Like hearing your journey about how you decided to go full-time indie dev, you could tell how much thought you actually put into it. And even what you were just saying about Patreon, it's something I really respect about you. I think I just said that, but I don't think I do the same. I
Yeah.
think I normally just kind of jump into it and
Yeah.
will assume that I'll figure it out. But it's definitely a mature thing to do, is to think through all the different expectations that you kind of are making once you make these types of decisions. And I think as I grow older, and I'm over 30 at this point, I have a lot less wiggle room to make mistakes in the same
Yeah.
way that I did in my 20s when I first started this channel. So I am kind of trying to focus a little bit more about the decisions that I make and the videos that I make, and where that'll lead this channel and myself.
Yeah, this is a huge tangent that I actually want to go down with you, because from what I see it for the content that you're putting out online, it's very obvious that you have a lot of intentionality behind the stuff that you do. You just praised me for doing like research, and you say that you dive into things more head first. But from my perspective, looking at the stuff that you're putting out, it's super polished, and I feel like, especially like my YouTube videos, they're like a little scuffed, and like just kind of like I don't take it too seriously, and I don't try and like polish a lot of like animations and stuff. But I watched your first video, and it's like got like nice transitions and like nice text overlays and these like panoramic like scenes of the city, and I just feel like your storytelling is all there. So anyway, it's and maybe that's partially because you have to be super polished in the tutorial scene. I don't know.
It's a great question. I think that's one of the things that tends to set my stuff apart from some of the other tutorial creators, is that I do add all these animations, and I spend a ton of time in post. And honestly, I think that's also, we could get into it, but I think that's what like stunts my channel's growth, because I don't know if like you've realized, but the last tutorial that I did was about procedural animation, and it took me a year and a half from start to finish to get this whole thing done. And I imagine like if I was to just do one live stream of here's how this works, and I'd like kind of just walk through the code, it would have taken a week to like come up with the script and everything. Whereas that was a very long process that I try not to live with regrets in my life. But if I were to point at anything in terms of like this channel's growth and what it kind of did to this channel, I do think it might have been a mistake in that front.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's interesting too, because you have a full-time job as a software engineer, and so you're doing YouTube on the side. Like once I quit my day job and I was making games full-time and also doing YouTube videos, I still relegated my YouTube channel to like not a primary focus of mine. I wanted to be making games, and YouTube was supposed to be supporting that. So I think when you aren't doing YouTube as like your primary focus, I don't know. I think it's interesting, because I think both of us have kind of followed, to varying degrees of success, followed what we have tried and seen what works. And so I think early on you saw that tutorials worked for you a lot.
Yep.
And what I found on my channel is that when I put a lot of effort into a video, whether it's like building an entire project or like going out and filming like outdoors somewhere, they just underperform tremendously. And so for my channel, it's so weird. I just like turn on my camera and then I just talk about something, and I don't like add much to it. And those are the ones that get the most views. And so I don't know how to explain it.
I think that's just authenticity, and it comes across very well with you, which is interesting, because I think I know exactly what you're saying, because that course that I made that I spent a year and a half on, each video like got diminishing returns essentially, because you had to have followed. I broke it up into 7 different parts by the end, and had you not followed the first few, like obviously you're not going to watch the finale because it doesn't make any sense to you. So when I finally put together the whole compilation video, which is an hour and a half long, I was hoping that like, cool, here's this new course. Hopefully like praying to the YouTube gods that the algorithm would pick it up. I don't know if I would say that it did. Ultimately, these videos are things that I'm proud of, because I do spend a lot of time on them. And I guess that's another point as well, is because this is educational, I feel like it's my duty to spend the time to research and make sure that what I'm doing is as close to correct as possible. And I'm afraid of spreading like misinformation. Like I sometimes get comments on my state machine video, which was the first explanation of like state machines that I thought made sense to me because I'd watched plenty of other videos. But looking at the way that it's implemented, it's okay. Like I think some better programmers out there would look at it and say, there's definitely improvements that can be made. And at the same time, I worry that like, I don't think there's anything typically wrong with that, like the actual explanation of what a state machine is and how it's supposed to work. But again, I worry that one day I will make a video where I'm just completely wrong. And I'll have to be like kind of noted in the back of my head, like, you made this mistake and you told people that this is how something worked and they believed you because you have all these followers. And that's like a dangerous thing in the back of my head. I don't want to ever be labeled as somebody who's like spreading bad knowledge.
Yeah, totally. And that's interesting too, because you can have it as like I guess there's two ways to look at it. Like if I were trying to look up how to do something in Unity, I would either want like, I just want to know how to get this to work, like it doesn't have to be like the right way. I just want results, and a lot of people look up tutorials for that. And then the other way is like, okay, I'm trying to build up this foundation of like trustworthy knowledge. And so I think it's like a good thing to be aware of, that you don't want to be doing things like subpar when you're trying to put yourself as like some authority in this space that you're teaching. But I also think that there's something to be said about like you're trying to be like both things, because you are teaching as you learn. And I think that brings with it its own special kind of spice too, because like I remember when my wife and I had our baby like a year ago, we were talking to friends and family that were like our age and young parents, and then we were also talking to like the older generation in our family, and getting different parenting advice from both of those. And I think that the same with parenting and game dev, talking to somebody who is just recently going through it has like its own amount of importance and like clarity that people can relate to when they're trying to learn something.
Yeah, no, I feel that too. As you know, my wife and I also just had our first baby, and we are getting advice from our parents who obviously haven't had kids in like 30 years. And they're like, oh, you just like give them water when they're thirsty. It's like, no, you don't. You're not supposed to give babies water. And then you also speak with people around the same age, and they're like, yeah, man, I haven't slept in days. So there's definitely that relatability. I think what's interesting about like what you just said about this authority figure, and that's where it's scary to me, because I do get a lot of like younger developers who are like, oh, this guy's got 80,000 followers or whatever, and he's got this state machine video or whatever video tutorial it is. And that's when it's like, they don't know that I'm also just learning this stuff. So there's a level of framing that I should do on my videos of being like a disclaimer almost of, hey, I figured this out and there's probably a better way to do it, but this is how you can get it to work. Like you just said, some people do come to these videos just to get something working. But I think because of the level of polish, it almost is dangerous how like believable whatever I have to say is. And I think that can kind of get dangerous on that front.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious if you could go back to when you first started your YouTube channel, like 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was. Would you do anything different, knowing what you know now about building up your channel, about the kind of videos that you're making, or any of that?
Dude, I wish I knew like what the magic sauce is that gets people's attention. I swear it's super interesting to see like somebody like Blackthorn Prod who like I followed him honestly in terms of making tutorials. Like, oh, this person's doing well. And then now he doesn't even make them, and his channel's bigger than ever because he's making all these like pass the game challenges, and those explode in terms of popularity. And then somebody, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sam Yam, who started around the same exact time, and she has been a lot more exploratory in the sense of trying so many different types of video types, whereas I kind of really have stuck to just tutorials. And for a while, I feel like she was also making tutorials, but pivoted out of that. So it's super interesting to see like her own growth, and now she's making her own game, and to see her channel's growth in comparison to mine. And yeah, I think that looking at the way that my channel has grown, again, I try not to live with regret. So I'm really proud of the work that I've done on those tutorials. But the procedural animation one, it's the one that kind of I look back on and I'm like, was this really worth the amount of time that was spent on it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like it was worth the time intrinsically, even if it's not bringing in the kind of views that you would want?
As somebody who was not a developer at all 8 years ago, it's cool to do something that is relatively complicated and come out the other side with a successful project. That being said, I think that like I don't know if I'll ever use it. My most recent video is announcing that I'm going to make a game this year, and I fully intend on doing that. I don't think it's going to have procedural animation in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to like you said 8 years ago, where you don't, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth because I don't know the story, but I'm really eager to learn. I know that you were doing fitness. You didn't have a lot of experience in the developer space. Sounds like COVID happened and you were trying to look at different career options. So just like, how did that whole process go for you?
Sure. So I went to school in Boston and I graduated with a business degree. But at the end of my college time, I knew that I was going to be a fitness instructor at this place called SoulCycle. And that is a big boutique fitness studio. At the time, they were like rapidly expanding and opening a bunch of different studios. So I auditioned and I got the part.
Nice.
And what that means is that you go through this like little boot camp intensive where they teach you how to become an instructor. I came out the other side of that and basically just started teaching. I met my now wife at a class, and eventually, a few years into doing that full time, I thought to myself, I don't think I can do this for the rest of my life because it's very physically demanding. I was teaching up to like 20 classes a week, which is a lot of time to be doing fitness.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, like, what am I going to do? My best friend who's a few years younger than me. He was graduating from college with a comp sci degree. And he's like, I don't know if I can get a job right out of college with the stuff that I currently know. But if I don't, I'm going to go to this place called App Academy, which is a coding boot camp. And I had never done anything at all with code. But he's like, you should check this out because you might be interested in it. For those who don't know, a coding boot camp is like 8 to 12, sometimes 6-month intensive. And what they do there is they kind of stuff your brain with as much knowledge about computer science as possible. And I wouldn't even say about computer science. They teach you how to make things with different frameworks and languages. And you don't really learn like fundamental comp sci knowledge, but you learn enough to make like a thing, a project, an app. And I got into that. You have to like kind of take an exam to get in. I learned enough on the side in the time that I had before their next cohort to actually get in. And once I got in, dude, those things are intense. That was like literally the hardest I've ever worked. Was this, I think it was a 12 week program. And coming from a zero knowledge base about anything related to programming or computer science, they really teach you as much as possible in that 12-week time.
Interesting. So is this like a full-time thing?
Yeah. So I put my fitness stuff on pause, and my company was gracious enough to like be like, yeah, sure, whatever, take your time, and then come back when you're ready. And I dove straight in. I actually moved in with my now wife at the time. She was my girlfriend, and I moved in because it was in New York City, and I was living in the suburbs. And I moved in. I barely saw her because honestly, you were there for like upwards of 15 to 18 hours. Like I literally barely slept in that 12 weeks. But you learn, again, just enough to make what you need to. And I came out the other side with a little portfolio of like a couple of recreated websites, and I actually made my first game there. It's not a
Nice.
commercial game, but I made my first game. That's kind of how I knew that I'd be interested in making games to begin with. And I landed my first job 6 or 7 months after that cohort ended, and
Nice.
thousands of applications later.
That's so interesting. So it's interesting because I have a very traditional education in comp sci. Like I got the BS in computer science and learned all the fundamentals, and like we didn't learn like any programming languages besides C++ where I was studying. And so it was like all about like, you learn one language and like kind of the components of it, and then you can go learn the others on your own. And so my experience has been very similar, where it's like traditional education for computer science is not enough to get you a job in the workplace. You need some sort of portfolio. And so did you find that you ran into many walls having this kind of like nice portfolio at the end? Were people wanting you to have more, like a degree or like more experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest things about education in general. Like, it sucks because that's just the way that our system is here in the States, and it might
Yeah.
not be the same everywhere. But typically, like, the degree on your resume is a pretty big deal. And it's just something you have to overcome at a certain point. What's interesting, and I think this is the nice thing about my fitness background, is that this kind of goes into my tutorial creation more than anything. I approach a lot of things as if I was somebody who doesn't have the comp sci background, because I'm literally not.
Yeah.
So when I try to teach something, I try to make it as like approachable as possible. And I do think that's something that has been very good for my own personal like growth and my career, is that I'm able to speak with a lot of people who aren't tech savvy and explain things in like a pretty understandable way.
Yeah, totally. Were you doing, when you were leading as a fitness instructor, were you teaching then as well? Like, was it what kind of when you say like instructor, what were you doing?
Sure.
Was there like a teaching element to that?
Yeah, so you get new people in. It's a spinning class, by the way. I'm not sure if that was understood, but essentially, I'm like on a podium in front of about 50 people at a time, which is super cool. And you get your regulars who have been there for years, and you also get the people who are brand new. And those are the people that I think you really need to focus on as an instructor, so that they can learn and understand how things work, what to do, and how to do it. And there's definitely that teaching aspect that comes along with that job.
That's so interesting. I see you as somebody who is very intentional and not afraid to do intense things. Is that accurate?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
Depends on what you mean by intense. I feel like I'm a pretty risk averse person in terms of like, I'm not a skydiver. I don't really intend on doing that type of thing.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I would say passionate is, I mean, that's probably the most accurate. What I care about, I care a lot about. So when it comes to making YouTube videos, I'll spend hundreds of hours on the same tutorial for a year and a half, and
Right.
and I'll finish what I start, because I don't want to leave something hanging in that sense. Like, there are many times throughout the past year and a half, not to keep bringing up this procedural animation tutorial, but it is something that like I spent so much time on. And there were plenty of times where I was like, what if I just didn't finish this and I moved on to a different video? But I think there's a part of me that would feel disappointed in myself if I didn't finish that. So when I say that I'm going to do something, I feel like my word is, especially on the internet, once you say you're going to do something, and that's kind of how I feel about this game that I announced a month ago, I have to do it. That's it.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that's been true in my life as well. Like the very first YouTube video that I posted was talking about how finishing is a skill. And like this, it's the same way. You can dedicate yourself to a project, but if you don't follow through with it, you aren't going to be able to see the results that final 20% would have given you. And
Totally.
I've been trying to focus on that with especially the games that I'm developing, because it's so easy to prototype ad nauseum until you're blue in the face, and just like have a ton of different fun prototypes and learning and all that cycle of not finishing things. And so it's been like it's not fun to finish a project, especially a game. I think it's like a lot more fun in the beginning, but you don't really get anywhere if you don't tie a bow on it eventually.
Sure, that's fair. That's totally true. Like if you don't actually finish your game, you got nothing to sell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's very interesting. I want to talk about this new game that you're doing. So you've announced that you are kind of doing this transition on your YouTube channel where you want to start making more devlogs, going into the development process of a tangible game. What are your goals for this game in particular?
I want to make something I like to play, honestly. Yeah. I haven't really, it's been a heck of a month with the new baby, but I haven't released any new devlogs or anything like that since then. I think that I can be hard on myself if I want to be, but I'm going to try not to be because you know what it's like to have a newborn baby. But my goal is to create something cool that like I have had in the back of my head since I basically started doing this hobby that it's about. What's interesting, and I've given this a lot of thought, is because I do YouTube in my free time, which I don't have that much of, and it's a hobby, I don't really feel like I need to follow the same advice that a lot of people give about like making small games first and everything like that, because I'm not a game developer by trade, but I am a developer and I release a lot of things at my job. So a lot of the time that advice is given to people who I would assume like don't ship a lot of things, but because I feel like I do that on a very consistent basis, when I say I want to make this game and I have this vision of how I want it to work, it's not like the smallest of games. But I think I can afford to like kind of make this exactly how I want it to be, rather than like strip out everything and make it something small and ship it in a month or two. What's interesting is I do think I see a lot of that advice these days is like make something small and ship it fast. But I don't think personally that's what I want to do with this game.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because people give that advice, I think, for a number of different reasons. And I think a lot of them are good reasons. One is like we already talked about, learning to trust that you can trust yourself to finish something. But if you've already established that in similar areas of your life that you've kind of, proven yourself to be trustworthy to yourself, then you can kind of elevate the projects that you're embarking on. And I think the other major reason people give that advice is for like marketability and viability for selling a game. And if that's not your primary goal, then it doesn't make sense to follow that advice, probably.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping you would say, rather than like countering me, but like, no, that's wrong. You should do it this way. To be fair, like there is definitely something to be said about shipping something quickly, and it could give my own, myself the own understanding that I can ship something if I really try. But again, if I want this game to be exactly how I imagined it up here, then I think I'd be almost disappointed in myself if I didn't make it exactly how I want to. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So you want to ship it by the end of this year, or do you have any? Oh, okay.
I don't need to. I just want to I look at other developers like Thin Matrix. I'm not sure if you've seen them on YouTube.
Yeah, I love Thin Matrix. Yeah.
It's beautiful devlogs. Every time it's like the most cozy vibes I've ever seen. DevDuck is somebody who I literally mentioned in my first video about like kind of wanting to follow in his footsteps. And they've been making the same game for years. I don't mind like eventually this project coming out more than a year from now. But I think that starting it is honestly the biggest thing for me. And releasing content on it and learning and iterating, similar to what you were saying or what you do with those prototypes of kind of getting it out into the world and seeing what people think of them. And then kind of making decisions based on either feedback or what you feel is the right thing to do. That is the biggest thing for me this year, is just starting, dude.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And I think it's interesting too, because you have this built-in YouTube audience of like 80,000 people that you can, I get good data when I put out a prototype on a video that people can give their feedback on, but it's like not, the video will get a few thousand views or whatever. And that's like enough for me to like go off of. But you have like a good amount of viewership. Do you think that your audience is going to follow you on this trajectory of doing more devlogs versus tutorials, or is that something that you're worried about?
Definitely something I'm worried about. I think that when you start a YouTube channel, you try to find your niche, right? And my niche right now is tutorials, not devlogs. So I'm curious if it's not something educational in the same way that it has been in the past, will these people actually care? Yeah. And I guess like when you asked me like why I started this channel, I think you asked me that. Mm-hmm. My intention was always to gain a following. It's essentially marketing. I love teaching people new things and learning things myself, but I always thought of this channel as a way to like, eventually I'm going to make my game and I'll have this big user base of people. Similar to like how CodeMonkey has his 500,000 followers. And even if like, I think it's like 1% of those people buy his game, that's a decent income. And that's the goal, right? Is to actually create something and have people, want to buy it and make a living doing something you love to do. But you can't do that if you have nobody to sell it to.
Totally. I 100% agree. And that was the main impetus for me starting my YouTube channel is I wanted it to be kind of the marketing arm of the games that I'm developing. And what I found is that it's actually most people are more interested in things outside of the games that I'm making. And to be fair, the games that I've put out are kind of small and don't have like a broad appeal, I think. But it's really interesting because I don't know if you've watched Gavin, the dev who made Choo Choo Charles. He has this new channel that he's putting out a bunch of content aimed towards game devs and kind of what he's learned through making a couple of his games. And he has a video about should game devs be making tutorials or devlogs. And he has like kind of some spicy opinions in there. I don't know if you've watched any of his stuff.
No, I know who he is because there's this other channel called No Clip, which did an interview with him, essentially documenting like the whole process around Choo Choo Charles. But I haven't heard of this, and I'm curious what his spicy takes are because I want to know what the right thing to do is here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting. He said he started out making tutorials on his YouTube channel, and he works in Unreal, so he was making Unreal tutorials, and he relatively quickly gained 7,000 subscribers. And then he said he decided to pivot because it wasn't helping him with game sales because people wanted tutorials mostly. And so then he started making more entertainment focused devlogs and trying to really lean into just like humor and hitting high level like development beats that he was going through. And that's when he started getting like a bigger following, and a lot of his subscribers had a much higher conversion rate for buying his games. And so he was saying like, so his spicy take was like, you should like tutorials and devlogs have like a different target market. And so I don't know how that'll actually pan out because I don't do tutorials and I'm also don't get a good conversion rate on my sales. So I'm like, maybe I should start doing tutorials. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that there's a little bit of virality that goes into being successful, regardless of if you're a YouTuber or you're just making some game that ends up on Steam. Like, there's a bit of luck more than anything.
Yeah. But and it's hard to decide who has survivorship bias and who has like good advice that people should follow.
Right. It's funny because like you wonder how lucky somebody is versus was it like actually planned? Like was Choo Choo Charles successful because he planned it to be, or because it had a very fortunate blessing from the algorithm of YouTube that here's this, or either Twitch or YouTube, whatever it was that made his game popular. And at a certain point, you'll never know, right? Like I think it's at least good for me to hear from him that like switching to devlogs is good because that's kind of the direction that I'm heading. But I also think that there's a solid chance that I'll do this switch and my channel will not grow in the way that I want it to. And whatever game that I make will not sell in the way that I want it to. Yeah. And that's just the way it is at a certain point, right? Like there's only so much you can do.
Yep. You had a really interesting quote that I put in my notes here that from one of your videos that really stood out to me. And you were talking about your process of becoming a software developer. And you said, the only way I don't become a software engineer professionally is if I stop trying.
Yep.
And so can you dive into that a little bit? Like, what's your mindset behind that statement, and how has that played itself out?
Yeah, that is definitely the fitness instructor in me speaking of, at a certain point, believing in yourself is like one of the most important things you can do. If you don't believe in yourself, why would anybody else? And one of my favorite, like other quotes that I used to say to myself is the world could believe in you, but if you don't, then it means nothing. So when it comes, I used to say that to myself when I was struggling to land my first job as a software engineer, because, I was sending out thousands of applications over the course of a few months, and to be rejected constantly, either flat out rejected, or even worse, you get the no reply.
Yeah.
That's really hard on somebody's own ego more than anything. And I used to tell myself, like, I'm going to do this. And I believed it. And eventually, all it takes is one, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at most things that I try to set out to do. And that's kind of how I feel about this game is like, I hope this is the one, but if it's not, eventually I'll have a successful one, because I'm not going to stop trying until I do. And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, because I found myself telling myself the exact same thing, where I remember working. Well, it's happened to me twice. Like, one when I jumped from building, like, being like a enterprise software consultant for like banks and insurance company websites, and then I wanted to get into game development, and then going from game development to I want to make and sell my own games and do all of like the business and marketing stuff and all that. I remember thinking like, yeah, it might take me 2 years, it might take me 10 years, but it's like completely feasible, like some of the things will be out of my control, but if I just keep working at it, it will 100% manifest itself in the future. And 100%. So it's like, if the earlier you start is just like one step further on the journey.
Totally, dude. I think that we're very similar in that mindset, except you're just like taking these larger drastic changes. Like yeah. I pivoted from fitness into software engineering, but that was kind of like it in terms of my pivoting. I think there's a level, like I said, I am a relatively risk averse person when it comes to my career and my future, but you're going full on like indie dev, doing your thing. And it's super interesting to me because I mentioned this in one of the comments before, but your understanding of how all these passive incomes can eventually add up into like the salary that you're hoping for. I have had the same thought years ago. And I was like, if I just stick with making YouTube videos, because like the pennies that YouTube AdSense gives you eventually adds up,
right?
Plus Patreon, plus making some courses if I have the time, plus the games that I'll eventually make, all of that will add up. And you can actually make a good living doing that.
Yep.
But I think that having a steady paycheck has like prevented me from actually making that full jump and just being like, this is what I'm going to do. In the same way that you were just like, I'm doing it. And here you are.
Yep. Yeah. I will say like it is a risky move, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people to do the way that I have. But I did do a lot of legwork before quitting my job, where I wasn't like a huge finance or budget person, but once I decided that I was like, okay, what if I left my job, what would that look like? Then I was like spreadsheets everywhere, and like trying to figure out like, okay, these are our student loans, and here's our mortgage, and here's like our average expenses for groceries, and doing all of this stuff. And then trying to build up like a financial runway so that, if worst case scenario happens and I don't even make a dime on anything that we're doing, I have like this amount of time before I would have to go back to the workforce and that sort of stuff. So like it is like risky what I did, but I was trying to like pad it with as much, like common sense that I could.
Right, dude. Again, that circles back to what I said that I respect the most about you. Is it seems like everything that you do is very intentional and you put a lot of thought into it. To be fair, like you kind of have to, but like, you do that legwork, which is very respectable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It is interesting right now because it's like, all the tax forms are getting out from the previous year. And it's funny because for a long time, I just had like my W-2 from my full-time job. And now it's like, I'm getting like all of these, 1099 tax forms from like all my different revenue streams, and it's like a lot of stuff to compile, and it is like interesting seeing like, oh, a trickle here, and then it's like pooling up and
Yep.
all this stuff.
You pull everything together and eventually it adds up.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sounds like a tax nightmare. So good
Yeah,
luck.
yeah. Well, one of my best buddies from high school is a CPA, and so I just give everything to him, and that's the best way to go about it. In my
That's what friends are for.
Yeah,
Your taxes.
exactly. I'm really interested about your journey for going back to that quote for the only way that I don't become a software engineer is if I stop trying. Was there a point in time that you can look at and say like, oh, this was when that decision was made? Or was there was it like a gradual sort of mindset shift, or was it like a kind of a tight turn?
So App Academy had a like pre-course essentially that you could take. And part of it, I essentially made like Hangman. And I remember showing that off to my now wife's family. And we like played Hangman on this little in the terminal, right? And they were like, "This is so cool." And like I specifically remember like having made something that these people were getting joy out of, and I was like, "This is what I think I want to do for the rest of my life."
Yeah.
Then the moment that I made my first game, and like we had a show and tell at the end of the App Academy like boot camp. So essentially, you're like showing off your portfolio. And people were playing my game and they liked it. And I was like, okay, this is also something that I think is in my future. Yeah. So there is a little bit of background that I have on making games that really kind of led me to when COVID happened and SoulCycle stopped. I knew like this is kind of the direction that I want to head with my extra free time.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It's hard because you are, like I said, you seem very intentional. You're not afraid of working really hard, and I'm interested, how do you find that motivation? Because especially with like all the stuff you're going on, like especially with like a baby and stuff, but like your full-time job and doing all of this stuff, because YouTube in itself is a grind, but having to learn like all this game dev stuff and then put together a tight tutorial and then make the video about it, like that is an enormous grind. Do you find yourself going through these slumps of motivation, or do you have anything that you like, rhythms that you implement that help you stay motivated?
Dude, I read books, right? Like I've read what's it called? Something about what's the habit one? Do you know this one?
Oh, Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits. I've read that like 10 times.
Yeah.
And every time I try this book right here is a habit tracking book that I have not opened. I am like consistently trying to be the best version of myself, but like consistently failing in that sense that like I'm going to make these changes and I'll stick to it like for maybe a month. And eventually those habits die out, and I'll reread Atomic Habits and try again over and over and over again. And honestly, like that's the definition of insanity, is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So maybe I should try to do something a little different. But in the sense that like what really motivates me is, I mentioned it before, but there are maybe like a handful of things in life that really make me happy. And I think making YouTube videos is actually something I really enjoy. I like making a good edit and spending time on that. I love video games, and that is where this naturally comes from. I spent 26 years of my life loving video games. And now that I have like the ability to actually make them myself, the passion is also right there of, I want to tell stories. I want to make games that are fun and have people experience them in the same way that I had for so much of my life. Yeah. So to have that ability and just need to spend time to do it is kind of where that motivation comes from. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned like balancing everything. I don't think I'm very good at balancing. I think my job is pretty intense outside of this, like my full-time job. And I need to sacrifice certain things in order to spend it on game dev. And eventually I do. I like might not talk to my friends for a little bit because I just go heads down into a video, or I might realistically like not eat too much because like I'm just focused on a video, something along those lines. So it is a balancing act, and I wish I was better at it. But I also think that eventually you just afford yourself, um, you shouldn't be too hard on yourself because everybody's human. That's kind of
Yeah.
how I look at that at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally. When to push yourself and when to have some grace with yourself is a hard thing to figure out, and I
Yeah.
constantly find myself at odds with that. I think that for me, I think growing up, I was a pretty laid back person. But then when I realized that I had a lot of things that I wanted to do and I couldn't fit them all in, that was when I started realizing that I had to like lean into some of these self-help stuff, like getting a to-do list and calendar and, reading Atomic Habits. And like I've dug pretty deep into that, trying to figure out how I can stuff as much things in as I can and be productive while still like not killing myself.
Right.
But I do find myself consistently biting off more than I can chew. And then, I find where like, I imagine it as like spinning plates, those guys that have the sticks and they spin a bunch of plates,
Yeah.
and it's like you spin all your plates and you feel like you're doing okay. But then like you get one too many and then they all drop. And I'm like, oh, dang it. And I have to pick it up, but I like to think that as I bite off more than I can chew, like my proverbial cheeks are growing, they're stretching, it's like,
Sure.
then I can bite off a little bit more successfully as I keep doing it over and over again.
That makes sense. Practice makes perfect. And if you practice good habits, then eventually they just are there, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the goal, is that eventually one time that I read Atomic Habits, they stick with me and I don't have to like reread it and reread all these other books that teach me how to be a better person.
Yeah.
I'm curious if like you were just saying that you kind of stick with this stuff. Does it work for you in the sense that, are you finding yourself rereading these things and like over and over again, or do you have your own habits that you're kind of you've stuck to and that's how you're able to focus on what you need to?
I've tried a bunch of different things as far as like keeping my life organized and staying on track. And I've tried time blocking on my calendar. I've tried optimizing my to-do list. I've tried doing handwritten habit stuff, and some of it works well for me. I think some of it's subjective, depends on the person, sort of a thing. The one thing that has consistently helped me with staying on top of everything in my life and kind of been like a cornerstone habit for me is exercise. And so I feel like if I like to run, I have a husky and she's like high energy. And so we go out and run around the block. And I feel like if I can go for a run a few times a week, then I feel like that helps me to stay focused in a lot of ways.
That's interesting because I do think that a lot of the discipline that I have stems from fitness.
Yeah.
I think that like trying to motivate 50 people at once, I think I got pretty good at doing it. And
Yeah.
I think I'm able to motivate myself in the same way.
Yeah.
So I think that discipline that comes out of being, for me, a fitness instructor, or for anybody being into fitness, is something that translates very well into like every other aspect of your life. Yeah, I think like if I had advice to anybody who is trying to find a way to motivate themselves, it would be to hit the gym.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't know exactly what goes on like neurologically or like, I'm sure that there's like some sort of chemicals that help you out with motivation or staying focused, as you exercise your body. But I do find myself kind of like atrophying a little bit if I'm just sitting at my desk all day, and like my legs are cramped and bent. And yeah, I think
The
there's
health
something-
benefits around fitness they're second to none, right? Like that's
Yeah.
a big part of life is making sure that you're moving a bit. And it's like the opposite of what, software engineering is, but you try to balance it out.
I'm interested. Do you have like experience with burnout? Do you ever like overreach and then find that you kind of fall into these seasons of burning out and needing to rest or recharge?
Depends on what we're talking about. I do think that when it comes to game development, I haven't experienced it, and I'm really lucky. But I also think that again, I mentioned it before, but my current full-time job is intense, and sometimes it prevents me from doing things that I'd like to do. And that's why that probably has happened. It's not like I've ever had enough free time to be like, okay, I'm going to spend like 5 hours a day for the next 2 weeks working on a Unity project. I just haven't had that time.
Yeah.
And I do think that's also something that we could talk about too, is like priorities. I've always been very upfront with myself about what is important to me. And number one is obviously family. Number two is my full-time job. And again, circling back to like risk aversion, I've never let myself spend more time on YouTube because it's not my main source of income. I've always respected that, like, I need to put my full-time job first because that's what pays the bills. And everything else is kind of just fun and what I like to do. So that is definitely something that I think is helped me in terms of like putting YouTube into perspective of it could eventually turn into something big, but it's not everything right now. It's not what pays for my family's bills and all that.
Yeah, completely understand that. Similarly, my priorities is like, even when I quit my job, I'm like, okay, how can I try and minimize the impact of what our family life looks like if I quit my full-time job? And so that was like a big question that I wanted to answer. I think it's hard because, like, for what I've been doing, porting to different consoles, like I've put 2 games on every major platform now: Steam, Xbox, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and like Atari VCS too. And a lot of those things require so much upfront work that I don't know if I could have really done it if I had just been working on that stuff on the side. Like I felt like I kind of needed a stretch of time to kind of establish like my game studio and like figure out all of this publishing and console porting stuff. And now I feel like I'm at the point where like I could probably work a part-time job and then keep doing what I'm doing part-time, and kind of like, because I've already built a lot of the infrastructure that's difficult, and now I can mostly concentrate on the game dev portion of it.
Right. I mean, you're speaking to somebody who doesn't have that experience, so it's interesting to hear that. It makes me a little worrisome about a year or whatever it is when this game is finally done. Like, that is a lot of legwork that I'm curious, actually, can you outsource it? Can somebody else do it for you if I needed?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They have different porting studios that you can use, and like, there's different ways that you can do it. I wanted to, since I wanted to minimize costs and also develop the skills myself, so that, and it's actually been cool because I've been able to start conversations where people are wanting to contract me for like console porting stuff, and so it's like still learning and making myself marketable for future jobs if I need them.
Totally.
But
I was about to say, like, hey, maybe I'll be reaching out.
please, if you have any questions about anything, please just ping me, because even if you're like, hey, like I want to put my game on PlayStation, but I can't figure out how to get a controller to vibrate. Like I have a whole like library of internal Unity scripts that I throw into every project that have a lot of that baseline stuff, already implemented. So just reach out.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't remember how we got on this topic. Oh, about priorities. Yeah. I guess trying to make sure that you don't sink your family's finances, but also trying to like establish the career goals that you want to get to long term also, I guess.
Totally. I mean, realistically, like, I'm curious, and you can cut this out if you want, but I'm curious like how that conversation went with your wife.
Yeah, it was and has been an ongoing conversation. It was never like, it wasn't like me going to my wife and asking permission for me to quit my job. Or like her saying like, okay, you have like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, anything like that. It wasn't like that. It's like we're constantly checking in with each other and being like, hey, this is how things are going. How do we feel? Like, and my priority has, what's that?
It's a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Totally open communication. And like we've been through, seasons where we were like, like I've taken on some contract work over the past year and a half, just to supplement some income. And there's been like other months where like my games have sold well on one platform and there's been like a sale on another platform. And so it is like an interesting kind of influx of realizing that my current self-employment is not guaranteed, and like holding that loosely. And then also looking at kind of like overall trends of, you know, how is the income looking and all of that stuff. So
Right. That's, again, the risk in my head of like, that would drive me crazy. I just, it's nerve wracking more than anything. So again, I keep saying it, but so much respect for you. I'm curious if like you feel like the system is working, because that's the biggest thing. Is like I really looked at how you're doing this, and we have the same mindset of all these different things adding up and pulling together. And if you continue doing this for like the next 10 years, like eventually that pool, like all these different sources are much larger, and at least ideally. But I guess the question is like, you feel like the system is working?
I have tried not to talk about my process in like a very positive light, because I don't want people copying me, because I think that it's like I feel like I am probably more equipped to try this whole process of like make small games, port them to consoles yourself, like all of this stuff. And I have kind of a niche skill set that like I have professionally before I, you know, went into this process. That I think a lot of people don't have. And so I want to be like really cautious about trying to get people to do it. I think the process is working, but it's slower than I thought it would be.
Sure. Interesting.
And so I think it is like, if I stick with this for a few years, I think that it would be a long-term boon. But that also is like, it's constant. It's not very cut and dry, because like a few months into my self-employment, we had a baby, and that just kind of like, you know, made everything a lot harder.
Dude,
and then
I get it.
It's like the sleep deprivation, and like, you know, the time, and like there was a season where I was trying to just focus on like, hey, this is like my baby, this is time that I'm not going to get back, you know, and try and like be in the moment and not worry about the stuff that I'm trying to develop. And then there's been other times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to trade some of my time for consistent income through contract work, you know. And so that's been like a season as well. But like primarily game sales has been my main source of revenue. But also, you know, you have stuff like YouTube, and I'm starting to do more sponsorships with that and stuff. And so it is combining, but it isn't like, I would just say it's not very cut and dry for me, but it has been a rewarding process so far.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the best things you can have, is a unique skill set that allows you to do something that it's hard for other people to replicate. Right.
Yeah, totally.
But it is noted that you had like a little disclaimer before what you just said, because that's how, again, we circle back to the tutorials. Yep. Disclaimer: I made half of this up and it somehow works. So don't think that this is like, I don't know, pure fact. Yeah. It's cool though, honestly, more than anything, to follow you and see the progress that you're making. I think that over time, the goal that you're looking for is eventually going to get there. It's just definitely something that you have to keep working hard on.
Yeah. Totally. And the hardest thing that I wasn't really anticipating when I left my day job is, you know, now I have, let's just say, 40 hours a week. What do I do with that time? And it's really hard when I'm trying to do both like developing games and make YouTube videos. And I actually am working on an online course that I'm going to be launching soon, because I thought about making it a tutorial on my YouTube page, but that's not what people who watch my channel are used to. So I'm like, I'm just going to make it like a cheap online course that people can buy if they're interested. It's about procedural generation. And I think it'll be pretty fun. But trying to figure out how to spend my time is super difficult. And especially with things like console porting, and like, okay, I made this game. Which consoles do I want to port it to? At first it was easy, because I'm like, oh, all of them, because I want to see how the sales go, you know? And now I'm like, oh, there might, there's a business model in here where I'm only porting to select consoles because the other ones may not be worth my time. So,
Right.
so trying to be like a decision maker in how I spend my own time, is not as straightforward as you'd think.
Yeah, I mean, going to a full-time job, somebody tells you what you should be working on, so
Yep.
it's a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And you're paid regardless of whether you do like how fast you do it and all that other stuff.
Right.
And right now, it's for you. You're your own boss,
Yeah, exactly.
which is a blessing and a curse.
Yep. I always tell people, people ask if I can go do something or like go to an event or hang out, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to talk to my boss. He's kind of a dick, so I probably can't go.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was a question that I had regarding like you're kind of a solo shop right now, right? Like you're doing everything. You're doing art, you're doing sound, you're doing the whole shebang.
Yep.
Is that the plan, is to just stay completely solo, or are you like eventually you want to make a game that realistically, and I've thought about this, because when I first started on YouTube, I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do everything by myself, learn how to make models, learn how to make art, like learn to make like all these different sound effects and everything.
Yep.
And 5 years later, I'm like, there's no shot that I'm going to be able to do this professionally in the way that I want to and make the game that I have in the back of my head in get the result that I want myself. So I'm much more open to outsourcing art, outsourcing sound, and all the things that I know that I can't do myself.
Yep.
I'm curious if like you plan on continuing to do it solo, or you're gonna like start doing the outsourcing.
Yeah, part of the reason why I wanted to be a solo dev is because I really enjoy wearing a bunch of different hats and learning new skills. But I am not. I know what I'm good at, and for instance, it's not art. And so I think in my ideal scenario, I would love to find probably one artist and just like partner with them and do like a revenue share with them, because I think if I didn't have to worry about doing art, then I could my cadence for developing games would increase dramatically.
Sure.
Because I spend a lot of time trying to make things look good, and it doesn't like it. Even the results are like mediocre by the time I call it done, So I think that that would be my ideal, is to have a very small team, like maybe just one other person. But
Right.
And I've actually had some conversations with some artists that are interested in that kind of possibility.
Awesome.
So we'll see. That might happen. Also, I'm thinking about shopping out my next project to potential publisher funding. And so if I got some funding, then, it would be awesome to be able to bring on an artist for that project. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm very much of the mindset that like the time is going by so fast. It is crazy. And as I've gotten older, my free time has gotten significantly smaller.
Yep.
So the time that I was hoping that I'd be like learning to use Blender better than I currently do, and learning to draw and all this other stuff that like people dedicate their entire lives to.
Exactly.
I am like, you got one, you're good at a few things, stick with those and let somebody else who does that professionally, they're probably worth the investment.
Yep, totally. It's like, I think I heard somebody say once, like, when you are young, you are full of potential but no experience or skill, and as you age, you like transform that potential into experience and skill. And so I think it is true that like with some like exceptions, you can do anything that you set your mind to, but you can't do everything.
Well said. Yeah, respect that. I would say at this point I'm old enough that I think I've kind of narrowed my paths and have to be pretty selective on anything else that I kind of try to pick up. And even then, if I was like, okay, I'm going to learn Blender, somebody who's probably been doing it for 10 years is better at it than I am.
Right. Yep. I completely agree. I'm interested. Have you started on this new game that you want to develop?
The baby kind of showed up kind of right when I posted that. So I have a like design doc which outlines exactly how I want it to work. I've started communicating with artists because, again, to circle back to what I was saying earlier about I have this vision of how I want it to look and how I want it to work, and it's probably larger in scope than it should be for first game, but I'm just going to go for it and, log the whole thing if I can. But at this point, I have the Unity project, like the file opened, and not much outside of that. But to me, it goes back to what I said and what you brought up of the only way it doesn't happen is if I give up. So like what's stopping me but myself?
Yep. 100%. That's awesome. I'm really excited to see what comes of it. And if you need a playtester, please feel free to shoot it my way.
Right on, for sure.
I think that's all of the questions I've got. Is there anything that you wanted to go over before we wrap things up?
No, man. It was just great speaking with you. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having
I
me.
enjoyed this a lot. It's been a blast. Yeah, thanks for coming on to the podcast. I'll be sure to include a link to your YouTube channel below. Is there anything else that you want me to throw in there where people can follow what you're doing?
iHeart Game Dev is currently my one and only YouTube channel. Who knows what happens in the future? I feel like if I am to eventually make this game, it makes sense to like kind of spin out my own, like, I don't know, name for a different company. Like it would be weird to have like iHeart Game Dev logo in the front of a game. So I'll probably have to think of something on that front. Do you have in front of your games, like, do you have a...
Yeah, my registered organization is Set Sail Games.
There you go.
I have a little sailboat, and that logo pops up when you play my games. Yeah.
Cute. Yeah, love it.
Yep.
So something similar to that.
Yep.
But nah, man, it's been a pleasure.
Cool. Awesome. Hopefully we can do this again.
For sure. Yeah. Hopefully by the time that we do it again, I have something to show.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right. See you, Nikki.
Thanks, Thomas.